The evening started quietly, the kind of calm that makes people believe nothing unusual could possibly happen. A woman was driving home after a long day, taking the same route she always used. The road wasn't very busy, and the soft glow from the streetlights gave the surroundings a peaceful look. She wasn't in a hurry. Her hands rested loosely on the steering wheel, and she kept the speed steady, just wanting to get home and rest. Everything felt normal until she noticed red and blue lights flashing behind her. At first, she wondered if the officer was trying to pass her, but the lights stayed fixed on her car. She sighed softly and pulled over to the side of the road. She wasn't doing anything wrong, and she knew her papers were in order, so she wasn't worried. Still, nobody likes being stopped by the police, especially when they don't know why. The officer stepped out of his patrol car. He walked toward her vehicle with the confident, almost heavy steps of someone who believed he owned the moment. He didn't look angry, just serious for a simple traffic stop. She rolled her window down slightly and waited. He didn't greet her or ask how she was. Instead, he went straight into a sharp question. "Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" His tone suggested he already assumed she didn't. She looked at him calmly and shook her head. "I'm not sure, officer." "Is something wrong?" Her voice was polite, steady, and respectful, but something about her calmness seemed to irritate him. He stared at her a little longer, trying to figure her out. She didn't look nervous, and that bothered him. Most people showed a bit of fear or confusion. She didn't. "License and registration," he said. She nodded politely and reached slowly into her bag to get her wallet. She moved with care, not because she feared him, but because she knew it was always better to avoid sudden motions during a stop. She handed him the documents. He took them and walked back to his car without another word. She waited quietly, watching cars pass now and then. She could see him sitting inside the patrol car, typing something on his computer. Several minutes passed longer than usual. She wondered what he was looking for. Her record was clean. Her tags were up to date. Her license was valid. There shouldn't be anything to search. When he returned, he seemed more suspicious than before. His eyes narrowed slightly as if he had convinced himself she was hiding something. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. She blinked, surprised. "Is everything okay, officer?" "Just step out," he repeated. His tone told her he wasn't interested in answering questions. She took a quiet breath and did what he asked. She didn't raise her voice or show any irritation. She simply stepped out, stood by the door, and faced him calmly. He began asking more questions: where she was going, where she worked, why she was driving at that hour. She answered every question clearly, without hesitation. She wasn't rude, but she also didn't try to over-explain herself. Something about her steady confidence made him uneasy. It wasn't fearlessness. It was something deeper, something he couldn't read. The officer looked her up and down as if trying to figure out what didn't make sense. She didn't fit whatever image he had created in his mind. She wasn't intimidated, and she wasn't defensive. She simply stood there with a respectful but firm presence. "Pop the trunk for me," he said suddenly. She looked at him, trying to stay calm. "Officer, may I ask the reason for the search?" He frowned, clearly irritated that she questioned him. "Because I'm asking you to. That's the reason." His voice wasn't loud, but the sharpness in it showed he believed his authority alone was enough. He assumed she would comply without hesitation. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't challenge him. She simply said, "I understand, but I would like to know if there is a specific concern." He stared at her again, this time longer. She didn't look scared. She didn't look guilty. She looked like someone who understood rules, protocols, and rights far better than the average person. And that made him uncomfortable. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," he said. She kept her composure. "I'm not trying to make anything difficult, officer. Just want to make sure I understand what's happening." Her calmness almost felt like a mirror reflecting his attitude back at him, and he didn't like the picture it created. It made him feel as though he was losing control of the situation, even though he was the one giving orders. He stepped closer, arms crossed. "Is there something you don't want me to see in the car?" "No, there is not." Her steady answer only deepened his suspicion, though it wasn't based on anything real. It was based purely on the fact that she didn't react the way he expected. The moment felt tense, but she remained collected. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew how to speak carefully, how to stay respectful, and how to follow the rules because her life depended on it every day. But the officer didn't know that, and at this moment, he didn't care to know. He circled her car slowly, looking through the windows with exaggerated effort, as if searching for a reason to justify his instincts. She didn't move. She didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She stood there quietly watching him, letting him do whatever he felt he needed to do. Finally, he returned to her. "I'm going to need you to wait here while I call for backup," he said. That sentence made the entire situation shift. Calling for backup during a simple traffic stop was unusual, but she didn't react with fear or frustration. She only nodded gently. "All right," she said. Her calm reply caught him off guard yet again. He expected panic, confusion, maybe anger, but not quiet acceptance. As he walked back to his cruiser, she knew everything was about to change. Not because she planned it, and not because she wanted trouble, but because the officer had underestimated the wrong person at the wrong time, in the wrong situation, and soon, the consequences of that mistake would reach far beyond a simple roadside stop. The minutes felt longer than usual as she waited by the side of the road. The flashing lights from the patrol car painted the asphalt in red and blue, creating a strange, uneasy glow around her. She could hear her own breathing, steady but conscious of the tension in the air. The officer had called for backup, and now there was silence, except for the occasional sound of tires on the road and the faint hum of a distant engine. She didn't panic. She knew that staying calm was the only way to handle any situation, no matter how unexpected it was. Soon, a second patrol car arrived, its lights flashing in sync with the first. Two officers stepped out and began moving toward the scene. The first officer she had encountered didn't seem any more confident with them there. He had probably hoped that having extra personnel would give him an advantage, a sense of control. But she remained composed, waiting quietly, observing everything around her. The second set of officers looked professional, but she could sense their uncertainty. They didn't know who she was either. To them, this was just another traffic stop that had escalated for unknown reasons. They followed the lead of the first officer, assuming he had all the information. The first officer began explaining the situation, his voice a mix of irritation and authority. "We pulled her over because—" He hesitated slightly, searching for a reason that made sense to him. "There were a few concerns, and now I need to search the vehicle to be sure nothing illegal is happening." She listened quietly, nodding just enough to show she was paying attention. Her tone remained polite as she responded. "Officer, I understand your concerns, and I want to cooperate. I only ask that any search is conducted according to proper procedure." The first officer's frustration was visible. He wasn't used to someone questioning him, especially not with such calmness and clarity. Most people, when confronted, would either argue, panic, or try to appease. She did none of that. Her words were precise, her manner firm yet respectful. That made him unsure, and the uncertainty in his posture grew. The second officers watched quietly. They didn't interrupt, but they were aware that something about this stop was unusual. The woman wasn't ordinary, though nothing about her outward appearance suggested anything different. She looked like any other driver, yet there was a strength in the way she carried herself, a quiet confidence that told the officers she wasn't someone to underestimate. The first officer made a decision and walked closer to her. "Step aside while we check the trunk." "Don't move around," he instructed. She obeyed, but asked again, calmly, "May I know what exactly you are concerned about?" The officers exchanged glances. The first officer muttered something about following procedure, trying to justify his actions. But she noticed the hesitation in their eyes. It was small, but it was there. She knew that hesitations like that could change the outcome of the entire situation. The officer walked around her, the car to open the trunk. She watched silently, her hands folded in front of her, her posture steady. Inside, the trunk was empty, except for a spare tire and a small toolkit. Nothing unusual. He inspected it carefully, checking corners, lifting the floor mat, glancing at the compartments. She didn't speak or complain. She let the officer do his work, understanding that impatience could only make the situation worse. When he finished, he closed the trunk and turned to her, trying to hide his embarrassment. "Everything seems fine here, but we still need to check inside the car," he said. She nodded again. Her voice was calm. "I will cooperate. I just want to make sure everything is handled correctly." The first officer opened the car door and started looking through compartments, glove boxes, and under the seats. She stayed quiet, observing his movements. She noticed the way he hesitated when he couldn't find anything suspicious, and she realized he was growing more uncomfortable by the minute. Her calm presence, combined with the fact that there was nothing incriminating, made the situation more tense for him than it was for her. After a few minutes, he closed the door and stood back, clearly unsure what to do next. The officers in the second car were watching, waiting for him to give instructions. They looked slightly uneasy too. It was obvious that they were realizing this wasn't going as smoothly as they expected. Then she spoke. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Officer, I understand your position. I want to cooperate fully. I think it's important to be aware of proper federal procedures during searches and detentions." The first officer froze slightly. He hadn't expected her to speak with knowledge of regulations. The other officers looked at her, a mix of curiosity and confusion on their faces. She didn't need to prove herself. Her calm, professional tone was enough to make them pay attention. "Are you a lawyer or something?" one of the second officers asked quietly, almost to himself. She smiled faintly. "Not exactly. I work in law enforcement as well, at a federal level." The words hung in the air. The first officer's jaw tightened, and he glanced at the other officers. They all froze. It was clear that nobody was expecting this. He realized that he had been treating someone as an ordinary citizen when she wasn't ordinary at all. The mistake sank in immediately, bringing a rush of tension and uncertainty. She remained calm, letting the revelation speak for itself. Her presence demanded respect, but she wasn't confrontational. She didn't need to be. The authority she carried was enough to shift the energy of the entire encounter. The first officer's hand shook slightly as he adjusted his belt. He knew he had crossed a line, though he didn't yet fully understand the implications. The second officers looked to each other, their expressions unreadable. None of them wanted to act hastily, but none could ignore the situation either, she continued. "Still calm. I know this isn't what you expected. That's okay. Let's handle this professionally. We can avoid any misunderstandings if we follow the right protocols." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. She wasn't threatening anyone, but she made it clear that the consequences of mishandling the situation could be serious. The officers sensed that if they made a mistake now, it could escalate far beyond a simple traffic stop. The first officer exhaled slowly and stepped back. His tone softened, though it still carried authority. "All right, let's proceed carefully," he said. She nodded once, politely. "Thank you. I appreciate that." For the first time, the tension shifted slightly. The situation was no longer just about a routine traffic stop. It had become a lesson in respect, knowledge, and awareness. She had not raised her voice, had not acted aggressively, yet she had taken control simply by remaining calm and professional. The other officers were watching closely. They were learning something important too. Assumptions could be dangerous, and appearances could be deceiving, in law enforcement as in life. Underestimating someone could lead to serious consequences. As they continued to handle the situation, she stayed focused. Her calm, steady presence reminded everyone involved that respect and knowledge were more powerful than force or assumptions. And though no one knew it yet, the events of that night would leave a lasting impression on all of them, especially the officer who had underestimated her at the very beginning. The night air felt heavier now. The flashing lights of the patrol cars reflected off the asphalt, painting the scene with urgency and tension. The first officer stood near the woman, trying to regain some sense of control, but his usual confidence had vanished. Every move he made was slower, more calculated, as if he was carefully measuring the consequences of each step. He realized that he had underestimated her, and that realization weighed on him like a leaden stone. The woman stayed calm, her hands folded loosely in front of her. She didn't fidget or show impatience. She simply observed, responding to questions when necessary, and maintaining a steady, confident presence. There was no arrogance in her demeanor, only quiet authority that came from knowing exactly who she was and how to handle difficult situations. The second officers exchanged glances. They had arrived thinking this would be routine, a simple stop that would take a few minutes at most. Instead, they found themselves caught in something unusual. There was a strange tension in the air, one that made them hesitate before acting. They followed the lead of the first officer, unsure how to respond to a person who seemed to know as much, if not more, than they did. The first officer cleared his throat and spoke again, trying to regain a sense of command. "I need to check your identification more thoroughly. Please cooperate and stay calm." The woman nodded politely. "Of course, officer. I have no intention of causing trouble. I just want this to be handled properly." He studied her for a moment, noticing once again how composed she was. That calmness, which should have made things easier, instead unsettled him. He felt his authority slipping, and he didn't like the feeling. He wanted to act decisively, but every step he took now felt cautious, almost hesitant. As he reached for her wallet to check her identification again, she spoke softly, almost as if offering advice. "Officer, it might be helpful to remember that federal agents have specific protocols. I follow those protocols every day in my work. I'm happy to answer any questions if it will make this process smoother." The words struck him. He froze for a moment, realizing that he had no idea who he was dealing with. His assumptions had been entirely wrong, and now the weight of that mistake was beginning to sink in. The other officers looked on, curiosity and uncertainty mixing on their faces. "What do you mean by federal protocols?" One of the second officers asked cautiously. She gave a small, polite smile. "I work at the federal level. My job requires strict adherence to rules, procedures, and regulations. That means I am trained to understand when a search or detention is appropriate and when it is not. I hope we can handle this stop without misunderstanding, and I am happy to cooperate within the law." The words were simple, yet powerful. The first officer's jaw tightened. He realized he had not just underestimated a civilian, he had underestimated someone with authority far beyond his own. The implications of that miscalculation were immediate and significant. He had acted based on assumptions. Now he faced the uncomfortable truth that his actions could have serious consequences. The woman remained calm throughout, her voice steady, her posture confident. She wasn't threatening or aggressive. She didn't raise her voice, yet her presence commanded attention. The officers couldn't ignore the fact that they were now dealing with someone who had far more experience and authority than they did. The first officer's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his belt. He realized that the situation was no longer about a routine stop. Every word, every movement mattered now. Any misstep could escalate things further. He felt the tension rising in his chest, a mix of fear and embarrassment. He had made a mistake, and he knew it. Then she said it, softly but clearly, as if stating a fact everyone needed to understand. "I am a federal agent." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The first officer froze. The second officer's eyes widened in surprise. They had not expected this revelation. For a moment, it was complete silence, except for the hum of the patrol car engines and the faint sound of distant traffic. The officer who had stopped her first looked around. Suddenly aware of how serious the situation had become, his previous confidence had evaporated completely. He realized that his actions were not just a local matter anymore. They could have federal implications. He had treated someone with ordinary assumptions. Those assumptions were completely wrong. The woman didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand anything. She simply stood there, calm and professional, allowing her words to speak for themselves. The authority in her voice was quiet but undeniable. She didn't need to threaten or push. The officers could feel it without needing to be told. This was someone they could not underestimate. One of the second officers finally spoke, his voice low and cautious. Are you serious?" She nodded once, politely. "Yes, I am. I am asking that we handle this stop properly, according to the law. I am fully cooperative. but I also expect my rights and my position to be respected."
How?
The first officer swallowed hard. He could feel the weight of the mistake he had made pressing down on him. He had assumed that the woman was ordinary, that she would react like most people, nervous, unsure, compliant. Instead, she had remained calm, professional, and completely in control. The realization that he had misjudged her filled him with unease. He stepped back slightly, trying to regain composure. "All right. Let's take this carefully," he said, his voice quieter than before. She nodded again, her expression neutral but confident. "Thank you. That is all I ask." The atmosphere shifted. The tension remained, but now it was mixed with respect and caution. The officers understood that this was no longer just about enforcing local law. They were now dealing with someone whose authority could reach far beyond their own. Every decision mattered. Every action could have consequences. The woman stayed calm, observing their reactions. She understood the power of her presence and used it wisely. She didn't need to dominate the conversation or issue orders. Her professionalism and quiet authority did that for her. The first officer finally exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and resignation. He realized that the situation had changed completely in a few moments. What had begun as a routine stop had become a lesson in respect, awareness, and humility. His assumptions had led him to misjudge the wrong person, and now he faced the reality of that mistake. She remained polite, steady, and unshaken. Her calmness was disarming, but it also commanded attention. She didn't need to act forcefully to take control of the situation. Her authority was understood simply through her presence and her words. As the night continued, the officers began to adjust their approach. They moved carefully, aware that they were no longer dealing with an ordinary citizen. The woman's professionalism set the tone. Her calm, composed, and confident behavior reminded everyone involved that respect and knowledge were more powerful than assumptions, force, or impatience. In that quiet stretch of road, with flashing lights painting the scene in red and blue, the first officer understood something he hadn't expected. Underestimating someone, especially someone with knowledge and authority, could have serious consequences. The lesson was clear, and it was immediate. The woman had revealed her identity, and with that revelation, the balance of power shifted. What had started as a routine traffic stop had transformed into a moment that would leave a lasting impression on every officer present. And though the tension was still palpable, there was also a sense of understanding, for Minga recognition that authority, respect, and professionalism mattered more than assumptions or appearances. She remained calm, her posture relaxed but confident, letting her words and presence speak louder than any argument or action. The first officer and his colleagues were forced to confront the reality of their misjudgment. They had underestimated the wrong person, and now they would have to navigate the consequences carefully. Learning a lesson that they would not soon forget the days after the traffic stop felt heavy for the first officer. The memory of the night kept replaying in his mind, each moment highlighting his mistakes. Each action a reminder of how easily assumptions could lead to serious consequences. He went through his routine at the station mechanically, his mind not on the usual tasks, but on the review, the reports, and the lesson he could not forget. He had faced federal consequences, not immediate punishment in the traditional sense, but a clear message about respect, awareness, and professional responsibility. The supervisors at the station had scheduled a meeting with him to go over the incident in detail. They wanted to understand every step he had taken, every decision, and every assumption that led to the situation escalating. As he walked into the meeting room, he could feel the weight of accountability pressing down on him. It was not anger from the supervisors that unsettled him. It was the sober reality of his misjudgment. He had underestimated someone, and it almost caused a situation that could have escalated further. The woman, the federal agent, had not sought punishment for him, but her calm authority had made it clear that there were standards to be met, and any deviation from those standards had consequences. The first officer realized that the incident was a turning point in his career. He could either let it break his confidence or let it teach him a lesson he would carry for life. The review process was thorough. Every detail from the night was examined. The first officer had to describe what he thought, why he acted the way he did, and how he responded when confronted with information he had not expected. The supervisors asked questions calmly, not to intimidate him, but to ensure that lessons were learned and that procedures were clearly understood. The officer realized how unprepared he had been for a situation that involved someone with federal authority. After the review, it became clear that he would face disciplinary action. There would be retraining and oversight, and his actions would be noted in his professional record. But more than the formal consequences, he carried a personal weight, the recognition of how easily pride and assumptions could cloud judgment. He knew now that his authority did not give him the right to act without understanding the full situation, and that respect for others' positions, knowledge, and rights was not optional. The federal agent's role had not been punitive. She had acted professionally, calmly, and with clear authority. She had reminded the officers that rules, protocols, and respect were not just guidelines. They were essential to maintaining safety and professionalism. She had done nothing aggressively, yet her presence had taught a lesson far deeper than words alone could convey. The first officer understood that her calm, collected demeanor was a form of power, a power he had underestimated. In the days that followed, the story of the incident circulated quietly within the department. Other officers discussed it among themselves, reflecting on how easily assumptions could lead to serious consequences. Many admitted that they, too, had underestimated someone at some point in their career, and the story served as a cautionary tale. It wasn't about embarrassment. It was about awareness, respect, and professionalism. The first officer spent time reflecting on what had happened. He thought about the beginning of the stop, how he had assumed the woman would act like anyone else, and how that assumption had led him to take steps he now knew were reckless. He thought about her calm demeanor, her respectful yet firm communication, and the authority she carried without aggression. He realized that authority was not about shouting orders or asserting dominance. It was about presence, knowledge, and confidence. He also thought about the consequences, not just the formal review and retraining, but the personal lessons he had learned. He understood that in law enforcement, decisions made in a moment could have ripple effects far beyond what anyone expected. He knew he would never again approach a situation based solely on assumptions or appearances. He would take time, observe carefully, and respect the experience and authority of others, regardless of how they looked or how calm they appeared. Months later, the first officer began to notice changes in himself. He approached stops with a new perspective, listening more carefully, observing more thoroughly, and maintaining respect for everyone he encountered. The incident had humbled him, but it had also strengthened him. He became more patient, more thoughtful, and more aware of the responsibility that came with his authority. The story of the night also stayed with the other officers who had been present. They too had learned a valuable lesson. Never underestimate someone based on their appearance or initial demeanor. The calmest, most polite person might have authority, knowledge, and training far beyond what anyone could guess. Respect was not optionally, was essential. For the federal agent, the incident was a routine part of her job, though it had made a lasting impression on the officers involved. She had handled the situation professionally, prevented escalation, and ensured that proper procedures were followed. Her actions reminded everyone that authority comes with responsibility, and professionalism is measured not by force, but by conduct, knowledge, and presence. The first officer often thought about that night. He remembered the flashing lights, the tension, and the moment when he realized he had misjudged her. He remembered her calm voice, the clarity of her words, and the quiet strength she carried. He knew that without her intervention, the stop could have escalated in ways that would have been far more serious. He carried that memory as a constant reminder. Humility, awareness, and respect are just as important as authority. Years later, the incident was still mentioned quietly during training sessions. New officers were told the story not as a tale of embarrassment, but as a lesson in professionalism. They learned that assumptions could be dangerous, that respect must be earned and given, and that calm, confident authority can shift any situation. The first officer, now more experienced, would often share his own reflections, emphasizing the human side of law enforcement, Mistakes can happen, but learning from them is what defines a professional. Ultimately, the incident had changed everyone involved. The first officer grew into a more thoughtful, respectful, and cautious officer. The other officers learned the importance of awareness and respect, and the federal agent had shown without confrontation that professionalism and calm authority could command respect and prevent a necessary conflict. The night had begun as an ordinary traffic stop, but it had become a defining moment. It taught lessons that went far beyond the road, beyond the flashing lights, and beyond the initial tension. It was a lesson about human behavior, responsibility, and the power of calm. Professional authority, and for the first officer, the lesson remained vivid and clear. Never underestimate anyone. Appearances can be deceiving, calmness can hold strength, and authority carries responsibility. The consequences of ignoring that truth were real, and the memory of the night would guide him for the rest of his career. The story ended not with punishment or conflict, but with understanding and growth. Everyone involved had learned something vital. Respect and professionalism are not just ideals, they are the foundation of safety, trust, and authority. And the lesson was one that would never be forgotten.